All right.
Go ahead and go.
I'm Rich Curtis, and you can find me at richcurtis.com. And I just finished up talking to Jeff Smith on Vroom, Vroom, Veer.
That was perfect. Good job, sir. Thank you. All right. I'm going to hit stop. I'll be right back.
Are you ready to thoughtfully steer away from your revved up, frenzied, and far too often scripted life? Then welcome to Vroom Vroom Veer with Jeff Smith, where he guides you down the road differently traveled by sharing unique experiences with guests who have managed to shift away from a life stuck on cruise control and veered their way into a more authentic and fulfilling one in all sorts of interesting and kind of remarkable ways. Get ready to Vroom Vroom Veer with your differently traveled road chauffeur, Jeff Smith.
Ed Roman, thank you so much for being on Vroom Vroom Veer, and welcome to the show. How's it going, man?
Jeff, I am well. How are you, my friend? It's nice to talk to you today.
I am staying safe. I'm staying healthy, and Vegas is opening up, you know, and you're on lockdown again.
Yeah.
So, So, you know, saying that takes on a whole new meaning in a global pandemic. How are you? First you have to say I'm safe and I'm healthy, right? And welcome to 2020, 21, 20. Right. Anyway, so talk a little bit about what you're excited about in your music business, whatever you got going on over there at edroman.net.
Well, I was going to say you're down. Yeah, absolutely. You're down in Vegas. So other than the pandemic or whatever it might be, you're warmer than we are in Canada right now.
Yes. Actually, we're having a cool spell, but I think we're going to be in the high 70s. Low 70s for the next 3 days. And then
if I could have a day of 70. Oh.
Yeah, you're up there in the Great White North. Kind of like even more north than where I grew up in Michigan. So, your garden's kind of, I don't know. Have you planted yet for the spring?
I've got 160 some odd plants growing in the garage. Started tomatoes,
in the garage.
peppers,
Gotcha, nice.
Squash. I've got a little special light in there and a little tent and everything. But I was doing
like a little
some
greenhouse thing.
Basically, yeah, and little domes and stuff to start everything, and heat mats for seeds and stuff, and everything's doing really well. I'm just really hoping the warm weather comes a little earlier this year.
So you can get outside.
Well, you all need a reprieve being cooped up, and it's just vitamin D and fresh air, and it's just, it's so good
vitamin
to be
D.
out, right?
Ugh. When you go outside and get the sunshine on your skin, I take my shirt off. I'm like, I know I'm fat and lazy and bald. I don't care. Look at me.
Oh, no, man. Hey, when the weather's nice, got to get on the sunscreen, and I'm out there like half naked crawling around in the garden because I like it.
You got to have the vitamin D.
Yeah, and it's just, I'm a bit of a sun worshiper. I know you got to be careful today in this day and age and everything like that. But at the same time, it's like, it's just the warm weather, the smell, the gases, the environmental gases in the air. Just like, it's so good. And I mean, everything, I've been growing food for a long time. I just know how much something will respond to something like ozone or just basic things that are in the atmosphere. You just go, holy cow, look at the difference overnight. Right?
I missed that.
I feel that way.
Have you ever
from the process?
Totally.
Yeah.
Have you ever spent any time in a desert?
No, but I'd really like to, just so long as it's like, there's water somewhere to drink.
Right. You should come visit Vegas sometime when you can travel.
I would love
again.
that. Yeah, I would love that.
Here's the thing that you'll notice, and I noticed like right away when I moved here in 2017 from Southern California. So Southern California is awesome weather-wise, right? It's perfect, but it's just too damn expensive. So that's why I moved, right? But the first thing I noticed when I moved here in Vegas, I'm walking around, it's like nature, I'm by the mountains. There's like all kinds of like, even desert nature, plants and trees, and there's rosemary and what else? Rosemary, sage, right? But you can't smell a damn thing.
Because it's so dry.
It's so damn dry. I know, it's like being
but
in
that's
space.
that's where you must in the evening, where whatever humidity, maybe residual or just the transference of heat energies, you may actually be more aware of it in the evening hours, closer to dusk and stuff.
Yeah, you get a little bit like when I would say like late April, early May, I can smell my backyard. But you're right,
Nice.
only in the morning. Yeah, when you get a little bit of residual moisture in the air, just enough moisture to float around. But
and the dew point is where it is, and everything's getting a little bit extra moisture. And it goes.
But when it actually does rain and you can smell everything, and you're just like, it's like those astronauts. Have you ever heard the astronauts that are living on the space station for a long time all at once? Whenever they get the shipments from Earth, the first thing they all do is like hover around and crack the seal and smell everything. Yeah, because there's no smell on the space station.
But and you know what? Nuts? But I know, and scent is such an important thing. I mean, it's such a trigger response factor, even in memory and aspects to so many things. I mean, it can have psychological effects for certain people.
Aromatherapy, baby.
Yeah, aromatherapy. I mean, it's wild. It's wild. But you were asking me about what's going on at edroman.net. I mean, I'm always writing. There's tons of new singles that are coming out over the next little while, as well as an album that I'm putting out called The Recipe for Perpetual Spring. The latest two singles, Stronger and Tomorrow Is. Thank you so much. It's sort of my Baconian sort of connectivity to some of the writings from the Silva Solarum and things that have been going on, as I mentioned in our pre-chat about Oak Island and the sort of discoveries and neat archaeological discoveries that are happening there. People have been looking for a formidable treasure there that could, consist of everything from religious artifacts to Mayan gold to perhaps the actual sarcophagi of Sir Francis Drake. They feel that Bacon maybe had something to do with a formidable fluid dynamic tunnel system, which was also booby-trapped, where the actual true manuscripts of Bacon and, perhaps even Shakespeare maybe. It's one of the most fascinating things that's going on here in Canada. Neat. So that title is really connected to the lyrical content of the music, how it's brought together. And in certain ways, it's not filled with, troubadourian sort of esoteric language, but ultimately the entire album is representative of a bigger thinking moment. And when I started looking into this concept behind Bacon and his ideas behind what all this represented, I was fascinated by his idea of bringing certain disciplines together in order to figure out a bigger part of the picture. So I guess that's, why I love even music in itself, where how it evolves and where it comes from is so historically driven, whether it's in our living moment or something that you're writing about from the past. And it's almost anthropological. I mean, you could study music anthropology through university degrees and things like that. So it's fascinating to me. Yeah, it
is. And you can't talk about anything without a reference, right? Yeah. Context is everything, right? So if you don't have any sort of context, then, you could go the route of Frank Zappa. I mean, he had a, what was his comment? He made a comment about lyrics because he liked, sounds. He really, and rhythms and percussion, right? So to him, it's like, okay, I've got a rock band. I guess there has to be lyrics, but they didn't mean anything. A lot. Sometimes they did. Well, sometimes they had a political statement, but a lot of his lyrics were toned mouth noises to his own. Yeah, right. They're just like, I'm not saying anything. I just need to make a toned mouth noise here.
Well, in the weirdest of ways, his interviews were more political statements.
Totally.
And like you said, his
he had a lot of political moments.
He was like the Dali of electric music through that point. And I it's funny, you mentioned that, and I'm thinking Dali, but at the same time, I'm also thinking Picasso, because as certain artists go through certain periods, they're also like, questioned as to why they do what they do when they do it. And one of the interesting things I've read that Picasso had said, it was like when he was going to his Cubist moments and these sort of abstract kind of ideas about what art was, he said, it's not always meant to be literal. It's meant to be interpreted through the listener in some sort of a mode. And Frank, pushed those envelopes in a lot of different ways. I mean, Peaches and Regalia is in the American Songbook. It's an American Songbook classic number. If you get a real book, it's in there. There it is, Peaches and Regalia, Frank Zappa.
But I mean, the list just goes. And then, I I just love obviously growing up as a kid, I loved all the Zappa goofy stuff just because it made me laugh. But then later on you mature, and you like start listening to things like Zoot Allures, right? It's just this like, where'd that come from? That's like the most beautiful piece of music I've ever heard. It's just like perfect.
Isn't that amazing, Abe? But that's the transformation thing too. I think that what's really interesting about that on that level is that, so if you did listen to like Waka Jawaka or Hot Rats or something like that,
crazy
or
wacky shit,
200 Motels, right? There would be other elements that would pull you in other directions, like you just said. Yeah. So now I'm listening. So many different artists, for many people, including myself as a musician, speaking for myself as a musician, had that impact where it's like somebody said, hey, have you ever heard of so-and-so? And I'm like, no. So it's like, okay, well, who is? Give me the records. I'm dating myself. So I'm listening to these records and all of a sudden I'm like, well, who are these other musicians and where do they come from? And here's all this other material. And it was always this kinetic thing that was branching out. And then sometimes you realize, wait a minute, there's these two areas that have been branching for a while and now they're cross-referencing. Right. And even on that historical level of the development of certain kinds of music, whether it be something as prosaic as we can say as the development of instruments and then how those instruments gave leeway to certain compositional ideas. The same thing on the anthropological level where it's like, well, all these new ideas of cross-referencing have bred all these new concepts in musical ideas. Fusion music could be argued that there's sort of an Afro-Cuban aspect intermingled with modern jazz ideas and concepts, and now you have this integration of a new pendulum that's swinging in a completely different way as a result of these two beautiful things. Yeah. So it's like always art is doing this in this way, and I think to judge it or to graph it in too many ways is dangerous. I mean, we commodify it as a result of the importance of going, well, how do we sell this? How do we, what's the audience for what this is? But in the end, it's like, we just need to make it.
Make it and stop trying to label it. That's what, that's why, it's why does it have to be one thing? That's right. When I was a kid, I bet you and I were similar children. Like I had to like make up answers to what's your favorite whatever, right? Because everything was awesome. Right? So when anybody asks me like, what's your favorite color? I'm like, I don't know. What do I have to pick one? They're all awesome. And then nobody liked that answer. So I just started saying orange, because nobody said orange. Have you ever, that's kind of like what I am with music, I
was that way too, but I had that, but I think that says a lot about that aspect of popular music, which I love, is and there's vacillations to what it all represents. That I had that issue so many times where it's like I'm in high school and I'm listening to Jaco Pastorius, and people are like, "Who the hell is that? Like, aren't you listening to AC/DC?" And I'm like, well, I was listening to AC/DC, but I'm really interested in this bass player, from this band that I heard about called Weather Report. Weather Report? What the hell is that? Like all the Mahu Vishnu Orchestra. What are you listening to, man? You're weird. And I didn't care because what it gave me is a sense of the search for the excitement of prowess, development, construction, personal victories, being able to go through what this music represented and maybe being able to play some of it. There were so many things that I didn't care what the labeling represented. In some cases, I did have to say, well, I'm going to fight my position on how I feel about this band because I love them so much. So stop character assassinating it just because you don't understand it. You know? And I was going to say before too, even with whatever we create, it's fine to keep creating, and it's fine to love your category. It's fine to like what you're interested in, and interestingly enough, you develop with it as you get older. And sometimes music takes on different purpose in our lives for different reasons as we change. So it's a very interesting thing. It's very psychological and spiritual and many things, right?
So
same page for sure.
We are digressing from the beginning, which I love. So this show could just be like one big long digression. Yay! But anyway, so let's vroom vroom Veer. There you go. Have a sip, a simultaneous sip, almost.
There you go. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit before we go back in time. I'm going to tease some stuff. So we already pre-planned some stories. So you had a nickname, maybe. You might have been called Special Ed, and you were dyslexic, so you were in special ed. And then that morphed into a song that the title of the song was Red Omen, which is is it anagram? Anagram
That's
of your
correct.
name? Okay, anagram of your name. I always screw up those words. So I'm glad you're here for me. Thank you. So we're going to get into that special ed dyslexia Red Omen story later. But first, let's get into what your childhood was like. Did you come out of the womb like with a guitar and glasses, and you were like dipping them down and looking at the nurse going, "You slap me, baby, you're gonna get slapped back." Something like
Oh, I was, hatched in the summer of love, and
oh, me too, really,
and birthed in the 70s. So I had that bridge point. Let's say you might say from decade to decade.
I was born on the 10th of June in 1969.
So I'm a June baby too, but I'm 70.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So I was sort of like prepping the planet for your arrival.
Yeah. I had my feet from just an idea in my parents' mind and being a zygote to actually, being a second trimester child, and coming into the 70s of the Nixon administration and all this other crazy stuff. Right. Like I had a blessed childhood. I mean, and I had a childhood with parents that really wanted to be parents. I'm always reminding my mom and thanking my mom and telling her how much I love her, because as you mentioned, dyslexia was a difficult thing for me that I dealt with academically, and my mom was really there and present for so much of what it represented, even post school extracurricular work that we did together. My mom spent a lot of time not only with myself but my sister.
Right.
But at the same time, what I also mean by being charmed in outside of the conundrum that I dealt with on an academic level was it was a farm. My mom and dad, they brought cattle into the country that had never been here before from France.
Wow.
Those cattle are all over Europe or Canada right now, in parts of the United States. They're called Blonde Aquitaine. They're a special kind of beef cattle. They grow incredibly well. They're almost like pets. The way that the actual animals are, they're unbelievable. But the point being is that we had 1,500 acres, also 250 Holstein cattle that we milked twice a day, nice. 2 or 3 barns of recipient animals. My mom and dad also had developed the first sort of what you would call transplant embryo center. Here's the thing about my family. They come from the old world side of Europe. So my uncle was what you might say a gifted geneticist, in a sense that he didn't use a petri dish or test tubes or the ratio of understanding things chemically in an animal. He basically could see 2 animals, and this is an old world trait, knowing that by breeding these 2 animals, you would have formidable and or better quality animals as a result of understanding aspects of its physicalities, its behavior, so many different finite things. In 1976, he sold a Holstein to Japan for $1.6 million. It was on the front cover of Time magazine.
Wow.
Now with that said, the agricultural gene, it was in me. So that meant that I was in the garden. I was working hard as a young child, and I'm not talking like I was in slave labor, but when I was 14, I was filling barns with hay, straw, milking cattle, looking after animals, shoveling crap, doing everything it was that you.
But you can be happy because you got like a really amazing work ethic.
That's right.
Farmers are like some of the hardest working, and it's very rewarding work too.
Now, the other side of the coin...
Because you're done working, because you're exhausted.
Well, that's just it. And the thing about it is my dad and my uncle were both polymaths. So and the audience is just like they're into multiple things. And so my uncle, if I go back to my uncle just quickly, so he was like... he had a huge federal contract with the government in Canada for the uranium mines that he had developed. He was started banks here in Canada. He funded a lot of hospitals. Some of the first MRI units for some of the hospitals in our local area came from my uncle. Wow. He had connections to the Vatican in a sense that he knew Pope John Paul II before he was a priest, basically in Poland. And my uncle was very into the idea of free religion for everybody around the world that wanted to worship peacefully and in a peaceful way. So he was present at Vatican II, met a lot of formidable people. The Pope, when my uncle built the cathedral that was just off of some property that he had here, which was dedicated not only to the Slovak people, but freedom of religion around the world, the Pope actually came, blessed it, and it is the only basilica here in Canada that that is blessed by a pontiff in the physical, blessing the cornerstone. Now, with that said, that political sort of connectivity to the other side of the world, my dad was the mayor of our township for over 30 years. He was police commissioner for 16. He was chairman of York Region for 6. And he was also the first coalition candidate ever in the history of Canadian federal politics, and ran as an independent, as an MP, sat in Ottawa, and did probably more for our riding in that 4 years. Now, this is what I'm exposed to as a young child.
Right.
This kind of atmosphere,
no pressure.
Different things. No pressure.
No pressure.
Then my dad, also a heralded sports figure, went to school with people like Frank Mahovlich, was drafted by the Maple Leafs. He was drafted at one point by the Argonauts, said no to it all because agriculture and political science were far more important to him. He considered himself to be a devout public servant, not a politician.
Okay.
And this is where this is where the sort of ethical, the ethical sort of concept behind, even in Hungarian, what they say emberség, which is this idea of being noble to your position based on who you are as stature and how you develop as a person, was very instilled in me as a young person. My dad was extremely well respected in his community, not only by business people, but somebody that would run a vegetable stand, because my dad was the kind of guy that in the middle of the night would get up and go pick up the barking dog and take it to the dog catcher himself.
Wow.
He was
Right.
And so being so involved in so many different things as a dyslexic, it's odd that my mind works as quickly as it does. And that I am induced into this environment of all of this kind of influence. And in influence in a bigger generalized perspective of keep your mind open, listen to things, use your body and your mind and what you're passionate with in your craft. And it doesn't matter what it is that you choose to do, whether it's a shoe salesman or a rocket scientist, be passionate about it. Because my uncle had a grade 3 education.
Wow.
Okay.
Right.
There were those kinds of people that I was lucky enough to be around. So being music and being struggling with dyslexia, those people were some of the biggest encouragers in my life to say, no, you're good at this. Keep doing it. I may not understand it. Right. But I keep doing what you're doing.
And that's such a blessing, like you said.
It is a blessing. It
most
really
people,
is.
like most kids that, most kids that like tell their parents they want to be a musician, they's like, no, get a job, be an accountant. You hear that story way more often. So yes, you were definitely very fortunate.
And I think it doesn't matter. Even like my uncle came here with nothing. My grandparents came here with nothing. They were left Europe in the late 20s when everything was about to hit the proverbial fan.
Right.
And didn't speak the language, and struggled immensely for years. We were self-made people and a self-made family. But the most important thing, other than whatever we had obtained through our work, our ethic, whatever it was always about driving passion. One of the things that I find so interesting about anthropology and listening to psychologists today talk about this lack of passion. It's not that people don't have passion, it's that they don't have the encouragement. When you say to me, you're lucky to have those things, I almost want to cry. Because I do feel blessed in those circumstances. And as a teacher of music for almost 25 years myself, and understanding how difficult it can be, that those moments of encouraging words are some of the most paramount things that you can do, even in the midst of the conundrum.
Right. Yeah, totally. It's like, I have like tons of moments, like little stupid moments from my childhood where like I quit football, right? Like I was 8 and I was just like, I'm scared. Nobody came up to me and asked me why I quit football, right? But if you would have sat me down and said, Jeff, why did you quit football? I would have said, well, there's a lot of plays and I don't know what to do when I'm out there. I have no clue, right? And if somebody would have just said, look, dude, you're 8. Get out there. have some fun. I would have. I was like, really? Oh, okay. I was just taking things way, way too seriously. But instead, what I got was everybody, cousins, aunts, uncles, mom, dad, brother, coaches, everybody was just like, you don't get anywhere by quitting. Right. And to my credit, I stood my ground. That's what I can say. The lesson that I took out of that, I quit football under immense pressure. I did not go back and play more football when I was 8. I was like, no, screw you all. I'm quitting.
Well, and there may be things too from a life force perspective that is already starting to tweak. I mean, as a teacher, I know that young kids are wonderfully vibrant in their imaginations, and we may dispel some of that as just sort of like temporary interest. But there's also this other aspect to them that you can start to see at a very young age, which is, exuberant towards something in some way that makes you go, wow, they're really tactical. Wow, they're really academically inclined, they're mathematically inclined, just through subtle things. And I think that's in some ways where the education system needs to step up a little bit more in terms of what that is as far as early recognition, because you can really supplement those things in other ways without being overly drastic in terms of how it affects the rest of the classroom. Yeah. So, we're at an interesting moment in time, my friend.
It would be neat. Yeah. I don't know how you do that, overhaul the public education system, but yes, because I don't have kids, and I did spend some time as an IT guy working in a school district, so I just, as a sort of like adult witness to the system, I saw it's kind of like bell curvy. You get like this amazing teacher that, is almost like right where they need to be. And then you see a bunch of meh in the middle. They're not bad. They're not great. They're okay. Right. And then you see on the other end, some that have they should not be there at all. They are actually doing damage to children. Right.
Absolutely. And that's where I think we can look constructively and say, well, what is this curriculum about? And what is this expected field that they're supposed to behave in? I know that there's, let's say, the food groups, we need some mathematics, we need language, we need some historical aspects, we need physical education, we need these things that bring about sort of a more well-developed individual, boy and girl. Right. But at the same time, the argument can thus be made with what information is, how people are learning from it, how they then integrate it into their lives, and how they then use it to pursue something that's fulfillful. So, I, as a teacher, I could sit for hours with people, teach a class, work one-on-one. But what I've seen is that there's a young kid that could be 10 years old. They'll go out, go online, figure out a bunch of stuff, see people doing things, look at some information, and in a week's time, their passion has driven them to learn something that at that age, maybe a 25-year-old couldn't even play.
Wow.
So I see a birthing of a new idea of what education could mean. What those regulations and how they sit is in terms of the forecast is what we need this to be as far as curriculum is one thing. But the other aspect is to where you see people really start to flourish, even with, kids that are handy kids. They're like, I went online, I figured out how to change the thermostat. They're 11.
Right.
Yeah. They don't need an electrician, and they did it right. Wow. So who are we to objectify what that is and say, well, no, you can't, and that eventually, if you're going to be an engineer or an electrician, you need some paperwork, but it's in the right mode. They're headed in the right direction as a result of interest, passion, education, move on. And that's where it's like the diffusion of so many things in the practical education system is so fraught with other social issues that nobody's learning anything,
I learned some things, and I wasn't even a kid.
Wow. Yeah. We sort of come from a little different time frame as opposed to where things are today. The 60s and 70s was a little different,
Yeah. When I went back as an adult, I learned a lot. That was very enlightening. 1.5 years, 2 years, whatever it was. But anyway, again, great digression. Let's keep those up. So did you end up going to college at all?
I did. I won the music scholarship through my high school, and I went to college.
That's amazing.
And I was young too. I was only 18, and we had a new graduated system in our high school systems that made it possible for us to graduate in 4 years instead of 5.
Okay.
So, but my first, one of my first jobs was like, I actually found out through some weird paperwork that I had graduated, but they didn't tell me. And it was this weird event where I'm coming to year 5 and they're like, oh, by the way, you graduated, but you're here now. So you may as well do a few things and da-da-da-da. It was a music teacher that I really liked at the school that gave me this little room, and I started teaching grade 9s and 10s music.
Wow.
So, but like bass and different things that we were working on. So it was almost this wonderful preparatory work for myself, even going into college. Right. Because I was like experiencing a whole, this is a conundrum. How do you fix it?
It's a new role. It's a new role. Yeah. It's a new role for a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I went to college. I studied music. And in the second year, my dad became really ill. And he, as I didn't mention, struggled with multiple sclerosis for 30 some odd years. And this is while he was doing everything I mentioned he was doing. Wow. He finally he succumbed to a brain tumor called a chordoma. And here's it's fascinating and scary and weird and mystical all at the same time.
Right.
Usually children pass away with a chordoma. Okay. Because it's usually located in the pituitary, hypothalamus, and or pineal gland center core of the brain.
Yikes! Yeah.
Right. And what will happen? It's very hard to operate on, and over time, if somebody lives, like in my dad's case, it had sent a sort of spiral out, and it affected his vision. They thought it was the multiple sclerosis and what have you. But when he passed away, it was so tragic and such a great effect on my family that I left college so I could start working, and I went out on the road and just to do anything to get into my family's life. It was so important to me because my dad was such a big person,
right?
A figure in our community. Right. I mean, letters from federal parliament, from the prime minister coming to our house. Like It was crazy, wild stuff. It drastically affected me for 2 years.
Yeah, that grieving process is no joke.
Yeah. Until I got back on my feet, and then I started working as a music teacher in different places.
Okay, wow!
And then eventually up to a college here that was where I'm not far from where I'm living. And then I started my own practice for 8 years, where I was working with kids that were basically mentoring them from the high school level into the college and university levels. They could go on and study.
Wow!
But then I left. I started, working full-time as a musician and a writer, and working contractually with my management group in the United States. We more recently picked up distribution through Sony.
Oh, nice.
There's a lot of really amazing things that have happened because I used what I learned and took a heroic leap.
Sure. Yeah.
Out of necessity.
Right.
The leap of faith, just like I did going into college. I was so young. Most of the people that I was in school with were like 30. And I was 18.
Wow.
It was a real eye-opening.
Hey, whippersnapper.
Yeah, not only that, but that I was also getting that scary, wonderful exposure that was like, hey, kid, have you ever heard of this tune or this band or da-da-da-da-da? I'm like, no. And I'm like, well,
every conversation is a new rabbit hole.
Yeah, but I'm gonna go and learn it. I'm gonna show you. To a young musician that's tenacious enough, they're gonna try to prove themselves in some way. Right. And I remember feeling liberated on some gigs with other horn players that I had met years ago that were already in our community, looked upon as like, wow, they're like really formidable horn players and musicians. And I remember coming off of this gig, and we did this Jimmy Jufrey tune called Four Brothers. Really tricky tune.
Technically difficult, yes.
And really difficult. And I remember him calling the tune on the gig, and I played the head. He wasn't expecting me to play the head. And at the end of the set, he goes, man, how did you know, it was this, and I started
he was lost for words.
Yeah, I took a little while, but I was like,
I've got chops.
to myself. Yeah, I was like, and at the time I still couldn't properly blow on it, maybe not well enough, but I knew the head, and it was a tricky head, right? But I was like, that's what I loved about those experiences. And now as I've gotten older, I realize that it's all those hurdles, conundrums, things that are difficult, which actually make it good. It's the struggles that allow the learning process to occur. Otherwise, you become complacent, even inside of writing, when people are like, well, why don't you just write all this certain kind of music? And then you've got, what you do done. And then I'm like, but the experience of writing to me does not, as I said before, dictate a graph that says it should be this way or that way. I'm always interested in the challenge of what the catalyst is saying to me and how it pulls me through that experience.
Right.
So I for years got labeled while I was as a teacher, and I was looking for representation by saying, well, what are you? Are you a country person? Is this folk music? Is this a rock band?
Right. Everything
is this
needs
a funk
a label,
band?
damn it.
And for me, like you, growing up listening to Zappa and other people, music had this envelope that could be as big as you could possibly make it if you wanted it to be. That literally ended up becoming the thing that I could use to sell myself. Was that I had this diversity, not just inside album from song to song, but sometimes in the song itself. That it was this amalgam. And people said, well, how do you define this? They started asking me, and I'm like, well, okay, it's kitchen sink. It's everything that you can possibly think of, because it's how it's how it all embodies itself. And who am I to argue what the process is? I may have ideas constructively about how things need to come together, so I can, applicably say, here's the plausible idea. But in the end, I really want that to pull me through what that is. Just like those life hurdles, where it's like, if it's made easy for you all the time, you're not ever gonna feel even that sense of vindication or gratification for looking back at the proverbial row that you've weeded that was difficult, to go, hey man, those carrots are looking good now.
I was going to say, like, how do you like your eggs, Ed? How do you like your eggs? And I think your answer would be yes.
Cheers.
I'm always looking for new ways to come up with making eggs that includes every kind of egg. So I make like an omelet, right, with some egg whites, and then I crack an egg on top, but I don't stir it in because I want some runny yolk too. Exactly.
You want some levels.
I am improving my omelet. Yes. Why does it have to be one thing? Damn it.
Yeah. I mean, it's an egg. You can do whatever you want.
Do anything you want. Okay. So let's get into this special Ed Dyslexia Red Omen story, because we're about in the middle-ish, I suppose. Yes, we're almost right in the middle. Not quite, but close enough. So talk a little bit about dyslexia, being in special ed, and first off, like, just what is the lived experience of dyslexia? I mean, we all kind of heard of it, but I've never really had anybody describe what it's like looking at, text and trying to read with dyslexia. We've already said that it's not really a pathology. It's not a wrong thing. It's a different way of seeing, right? So describe it a little bit.
That's a wonderful question, Jeff, because what's on the sort of shadowed side of it is that it labeling of anything in some way when not totally understanding it can be dangerous.
Of course. Yes.
And with that said, it was a struggle, as I mentioned, because of the self-esteem issues, not being able to proverbially make the academic grade on the test level, the proverbial litmus test, spelling, reading. Comprehension is not related to the fact that we then don't understand the word. It's the word and trying to read the word that becomes the linguistic part of the slow down mechanism of what dyslexia is. If I see something like and did as the word elephant, I have to go through the process of trying to understand, one, how to say it, two ends up becoming recognition. It is the elephant. Objective of what the elephant is inside of the sentence then becomes part of the comprehension. Wow. So that it then makes what we do process-wise slower.
Right.
But interesting to note that this is where
a lot more. It sounds like it's like way more depth.
Well, it can be because, like, for instance, for years I would flip
because I'm just like doing I see the word elephant. I'm already 3 steps ahead because I'm not slowing down. I'm not getting that granularity of meaning or context.
Right.
I'm just skipping over, right? My brain is filling in a blank and going, picture of elephant, move on. I'm probably losing a lot of meaning.
Well, and that's what's wild about it is that through the slowdown process, like the rabbit, it's almost like
you're having to be mindful, and you don't have a choice. It's like
and not only that, you then become the realization inside of the 3-dimensional mind then starts to become photographic about it. Because if they run across, the problem solving mind goes, if I need to remember this word again, I'm going to remember what it looks like 3-dimensionally, as opposed to worrying about the phonetics of how it evolves when I'm looking at it. This is where the dyslexic mind, after talking even to so many dyslexics that then become more academically connected to what their passion is, would say, it's funny. I found what I wanted to do in whatever environment it was that I'm working in. And because I had to learn this information, get the telemetry and the data, I had to start reading. And when I started reading, I found it not so difficult because my passion was driving me through the problem.
Okay.
Whereas and that took years for them to be able to say that, realize that, and get to a position in their life to see that. A child or a younger person that maybe is going through those issues doesn't have that stamina yet in terms of their passions and what they want to do. Their life mission may be not totally sourced. And so as a result,
they're totally disconnected.
Right. But interesting to note is that 3-dimensional mind is thinking more, as you said, this is why I started giggling to myself, about the bigger part of the sentence, its structure, what the elephant is, maybe what the imaginative aspect to the 3-dimensional part of the sentence opens up differently for the dyslexic, and in consequence may also slow us down slightly because we become more interested in the shape of what's happening.
Right.
But but ironically then become photographic about it. I always say to people, if you're meeting somebody in communications that's a dyslexic, don't tell them something you don't want them to remember, because
they will remember.
And ironically, as a lyricist, people say, Ed, how do you remember all this stuff? Like even the things that you teach or the things that you're interested in, you sound like a walking library. Well, that's my problem working for me. I'm using everything that I'm seeing and hearing from the moment I've had cognitive thought. Even if I recollect something to somebody from years ago, they're like, how do you remember that? It's part of the mechanism, which not only is my stamina, it fuels me. It's part of I always think to myself, Tesla is the classic dyslexic mind, even though he was academically connected to his relative information. The thing about that is that he's bringing all of these external talents that is like a generalist together to create something in this new kind of way that people go, how did you do that?
Right.
I don't know. I'm thinking about it this way. This is like that.
How else would you do it?
Yeah. And it's funny, whether it be the field of science, music, physics, art, philosophy. There's so many people that I've talked to that are dyslexic from this field that I go, well, of course, it's exactly why they've gravitated to this position. And there's nothing that makes it better or worse. Like you pointed out, it's just different. That's where, it can be very difficult where there's a parallel between the amount of people. You talk to people in special education, even from the university, and they'll say, there's a parallel between the amount of people leaving the school systems as there are entering the prison systems. And the people that are in the prison systems have above average IQs.
Wow.
Some could argue, well, the IQ has nothing to do with it, but that's irrelevant because it's a problem-solving mechanism factor. That means that those people actually shouldn't be in a prison. They should be in an academic field where three-dimensionally they're thriving to be able to use those skills and abilities. But the academic field, which is extremely two-dimensional, fails that group of people. And that didn't mean it was bad in the past. It just means that things are different. And we could then go into statistical averages, which show that there's a relationship to the growth in the amount of people dealing with these kinds of issues against an old prosaic framework that doesn't seem to be supplementing.
Right. No, we could talk forever about education. So how, what age for you did you get into special ed?
It was right after college and getting together with some good friends and sort of be, realizing that we're all playing in these different bands, jobbing together. And I've always been writing and a storyteller and writing songs my whole life. Right. That it sort of fell into this category of like, well, why not? Okay. And then really started to work wholeheartedly at 4 full-length albums that we put out over 10 years that we had. And it was envelope music. To us, it was music we were excited about playing. We pushed ourselves musically. We pushed lyrically. We pushed ourselves arrangement-wise. It really, for me, in a way, gave me that freedom that I now have today as a writer to be in so many different fields and scopes, because I have so much respect for those musicians, still play with a lot of them today. And the reason why I love them so much, other than being my friends and they're great people, is that they have this love for such a wide community of music that they say no very seldom to a lot of things because they're interested in that exact same excitement.
Wow, neat. So give us the story about how Red Omen came to be. Maybe I'll play a little Red Omen. So Red Omen is Ed Roman backwards, right? It's an anime.
Well, it's got the Jumble in there with the foul play.
Right. Gotcha.
I walked into a club in Toronto one day and somebody said it.
They said
Red Omen instead of Ed Roman, and I laughed, and it stuck in there. And we had a gig that night, and we were sort of, it was like a jam night thing,
kind of like Pig
different
Latin
musicians coming
name,
in,
right? Basically.
Yeah, Pig Latin, and everybody started calling me Red Omen. Hey, Red, how's it going, Red?
Right.
What's up?
Red Omen, okay.
And ironically, I had kind of auburn hair when I was growing up as a kid, when I was really little. But I wrote this tune that was kind of, based on that feeling and that name still stuck in my mind, subconscious, whatever, about me and the sort of allegory that's part of my life, both real and fictitious. There's homages to certain people in there. Like there's a line about, being with Jimi Hendrix, flying in a UFO to Machu Picchu, to the special musical base camp, a fantasy, right?
Sure.
An homage to my manager, Michael Stover, the Red Hot Stove. There's a line in there, and there's a Red Hot Stove down in Pittsburgh going out hard like a cherry pie. Call me a fibber, call me a liar, say it to my face. He's like a cross between Benjamin Franklin and Ian Pace. Well, he was a drummer. He's a drummer. He's a musician. And the weirdest thing in serendipity is like writing lyrics. You don't know where they're coming from. That just sort of flowed out of me one day. And I'm thinking about people in the United States and, Philadelphia and Benjamin Franklin and Pennsylvania and all this other stuff. And ironically, without knowing, I find out that he's like 5th generation Franklin relative.
Wow.
And I always thought to myself in my mind, he kind of looks a little bit like Ben Franklin with the little round glasses and everything. I'd always joke to myself. And I'm like, what? You're kidding me? He's like, no, I'm serious. And I'm like, what? So those little homages and things became this really, as I say, as the song evolved, I started seeing it as this cartoon. Like when you're a child, this is why I love working with kids so much, is that their imagination is so wonderful and over the top that, anything can be possible. That evolution of the song Red Omen became the catalyst for me to say, I want to make this a cartoon. I want to see this one day turn into something that looks like this visually. I could create a video like I've done before, whatever it is that I've done for other songs and singles. But this, I always felt like, man, it's like a kid's tune. The way that it reads, the way it flows, the fantasy of it. And at the end, summating some ideas for the self by saying, believe in yourself. At the end of the video, Red Omen, the character Red Omen, is falling backwards in this sort of mystical mirror, catching himself.
I love it.
It's like, and for the dyslexic, it's like, you have to believe in yourself. You can't be concerned with these labels. That's why it's like I'm going passion-driven information, and how you follow that is so important, because it can erase all of those labels. And even working in the disabled community, people that I know, they don't want to be labeled the way that they are. They're running radio stations, they're writing books, they're doing all the things that they want to be doing because they like it, and they don't want to be I have CP, who cares?
Right.
Totally. And I guess that's what the song and writing it was, that sort of liberation for me. And then boom, it becoming what it was and working with the people.
Right.
Wild experience.
So how long have you been working with the dyslexia community now? And how did that start?
Well, after I met Nelson Diaz, who's the animator, and he's, Sesame Street, SpongeBob SquarePants, as I was mentioning, Kung Fu Panda 2, Ted. Wow. His work is amazing. And we had the idea. He's the animator. And I put together in my book these little pencil drawings that you'd see like stick people, right? As part of like the storyboard, like to give them some ideas. But I like when I work with other artists and stuff, I'm like, well, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? How are you feeling this? So I really wanted to have a big part of the envelope, other than what we had in our discussions, to be something he was feeling. And I think that's where good creativity comes together. The music is already written, but how are you seeing it too? Right. So
when you hear it, what do you see in your head?
Yeah. In 2019, I went to New York City, lived there for a month. I was in Manhattan. We released it through the Visual Arts School, which is where he's a professor there as well. And since 2019, May of 2019, here we are 2021, it's showed at hundreds, if not thousands of festivals around the world.
Wow.
Won multiple awards. Like I'm talking from Moscow to Los Angeles. It's brought, it's a wow moment to think that, like I said, there's this sense of serendipity, even connecting with Nelson and having a sort of frivolous 2 year of searching, knocking on colleges, university doors, other animation houses, people that just weren't interested. He emails me back almost instantaneously after following something on a whim, goes, this is really weird. I just came back from a trip from Machu Picchu with my family. And there's this lyric in there about it. And he loves Hendrix. And we both had this affiliation to like older cartoon work, like from High School Rocks and things like that we sort of both grew up watching and really getting into. So there was this wonderful like kismet and serendipity that sort of developed between the two of us. And then before you knew it, I'm talking to the president of the Dyslexic Society with all this information. It was just like, so it's almost 3 years to answer your question. And then in 19, 20, 21, and here we are,
Wow. Okay. And so did like did you say you were some sort of like unofficial or official spokesman, or you have like some sort of role with this? I'm the ambassador. Okay.
Yeah. For the whole Dyslexic Society. So, I took it upon myself, but it's really something that I think was endowed upon me. It's kind of like just my interest.
Champion, like the champion. Yeah. Right.
And I spend
kind of like take the label of pathology off of dyslexia.
Yeah. And you know what? That's the funny thing. As much as I've gotten a lot of acclamation for this and the awards for it, that's not what it's about. What I'm really excited, as I mentioned before, is that it's open dialogue, which wasn't there before. I got to use my arsenal of what has happened to go to the Imperial Bank of Commerce here in Canada, have a sit-down meeting with them, talk seriously about what all this represented. They put me in communication with wonderful people. It all was was this. As I said, it's bigger than me. I think that part of what I was mentioning about my uncle and my dad before, even though I wrote the music and I wanted to translate, my name is attached to it. It's really hard for me to take it a compliment sometimes. I always feel that a true act of generosity should come with no name attached to it.
Right.
So receiving this kind of like moniker of the ambassador, I would do anything for the society in regards to communications with people, speaking about all of this.
Right.
It's something that makes my life so good that how can I accept, a thank you for it when I feel so good
right. Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah. Yeah, I think we all go through that. It's like it's real humility. It's actual humility. Yes.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
we actually I think are so jaded now, right? That like we see so much fake humility. Well, in mainstream media, people are like, oh no, it's all about you, right? And you can feel it. I mean, I don't know. Like when I can definitely feel the energy of fake humility. When I feel your humility, it's authentic. That's all I was trying to say.
Well, I guess I don't mind resting on some laurels. Sometimes I think that it's okay to be proud of. Like I always say to people, like look what's out there. Look what we created. I'm so proud of what we've done together, and I'm not abashed to say that. And I think that we
all got to eat. That's okay.
Yeah, we all got to eat, man. There's nothing wrong with that. But everybody says, well, what's your greatest reward? Like, you've gotten all these different. Right. It's the work.
Yeah.
Exactly that, Jeff.
Yes.
It's being able to do it every day and see this way. Even if I made billions of dollars, millions of dollars, that's irrelevant to me. Yeah. It's more that I can connect every day. That's what as I said, it's humbling. It's akin to things that have happened to me in nature that have left me speechless.
Okay. I can relate. So, I was going to say before, as we wrap up, maybe we'll listen to some music a little bit. You know what? Let's take a sample. You're not going to be able to hear this because that's just didn't work out, but I'm going to put it on kind of low. Oh, I got to go back to the beginning. I'm just on a web page. Where are we at? We're on musicapple.com and Google Ed Roman.
Here's
a sample. Talk now, Ed. Nobody will hear it. Oh, this is Tomorrow is Today. So let's talk a little bit about this song. Let me play it a little bit because I'm stuck in the middle. I love these lyrics. You gave all your money to the man behind that. All right, let's talk a little bit about Tomorrow is Today before we wrap up, because that's the new single, right?
It is. And I'm proud to bring that video to people. We worked with a friend of mine on that and some really new sort of spectral ideas that's offered there for the viewing audience. So I hope people enjoy it.
There's a video of this song on your homepage, right?
That's right
correct. In front. So if you want to check that video out, edroman.net. Sorry, I think I said .com.
That's okay. .net.
Yeah.
Edroman.com was the guitar maker from California.
Right.
So you might remember Ed, right?
Right.
But it's the quintessential. The Buddha said the problem is you think you have time. There's so many.
I love that. Yeah.
Tomorrow already is today.
Right.
Mean, mañana. I mean, there's some things to put down, but there's other things that in our living environment that are important to always be paying attention to or be mindful of, because they also allow the space for the mind to relax, especially when we have those senses of focus. And I guess maybe even some, devout concepts behind spirituality and things are saying the same kinds of things, because it allows you to become more connected to what you are. But again, it's more of a statement about what's going on in our living moment. As growing up, as I said, in the background that I did with the kind of people that I had in my environment, I forced to sort of think on my feet much of the time. And I like that part of what's going on. So I'm always questioning things. And try not to put too much of my faith into one bit of information. I've been criticized in the past for looking at too much. You're looking at too much information here. Like, we should just be going down this road because but like, that's not what I was taught. I was taught to be not only forward thinking, but peripherally conscious in my living moment. And I'm suggesting these kinds of things in the song. Don't give your money to the man behind the white picket fence, like, yes, you take it. You frame that whatever way you want, whatever methodology that works for you. That's what I'm hoping translates inside of the lyrics. But there's so many things that we sit around today on the proverbial porch, scratching our head going like, how did it get this way? And how many millions of dollars did they spend? And we still haven't got figured out yet. Like, all those sort of basic, fundamental, general questions that are happening in people's mind are sort of supplemented in the lyrical content of the song.
Oh, nice.
And I found it interesting because I got to collaborate again with some wonderful friends. Dave Patel on the drums, who's an old-time musical friend of mine, wonderful drummer, musician, composer in his own right. Tobias Tinker, childhood friend. We've been playing music together since we were 5.
Wow.
So he's
just to have a friend.
Just have that.
Right? That knew you when you were 5. That's awesome.
Michael Jack is the producer on this and an engineer on this. I mean, Michael's worked with everybody from Oscar Peterson to Rush.
Wow.
So he's a good friend of mine and longtime working partner. The way it all came together, again, has that same feeling. And the fact that it's out there and connecting, people are interreacting with it, and it's been the butt of topic. It's all really good. It's all really good.
It sounds like, I know, just listening to the lyrics, my first thought was, what the hell? What's going on? It just sort of slaps you in the face. It's like, you're either gonna blow it off and stop listening, or really dig in. That's it. That's all you. It's very yes, right. And so I was digging in a little bit, So yes, I was like, this guy's not. He has something to say. He's not just making tone mouth noises.
What are you talking about, Johnny Appleseed? And forget your name. What are you?
Wait a minute. There was another song too that had like what was it? Something about plutonium. It was a plutonium spaceship lunchbox and a bathtub full of Lego. Yes, and a bathtub full of Legos. It made me think of this old Canadian show, Kids in the Hall. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
You remember Kids in the Hall?
I watched it religiously.
There was that. I think it was Kids in the Hall. It was either Kids in the Hall or Saturday Night Live. There was this sketch where there was these 2 dudes that were like players in a nightclub, and they're like, yeah, it's like a trunk full of pudding, right? That was one of their lines, like a trunk full of pudding.
I think that was Kids in the Hall.
It was Kids in the Hall, wasn't it? Yeah. And then they actually had a trunk full of pudding.
That's right. But it's like, you ask yourself then, where did that come from? Is there something in that bit? Because they were writers on that show, working intimately with like Lauren Michaels, and the way that was all put together. Saturday Night Live.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
All that 10.
So the Kids in the Hall has a Lauren Michaels connection?
Absolutely. It was shot here in Canada, and I think the 10 seasons that it was out was all part of like a Lauren Michaels new branch into Canada, looking for. I mean, Danny Aykroyd. He's from Canada, right? Right. There's a lot of
really
people
big into. I don't. So it's you, Ed. So you can go with me on this digression of digressions of digression. But Danny Aykroyd, there's this show on Netflix now. It's sort of like the superhero origin story of Ghostbusters, the movie, and he wrote it, and his whole family was big into occult shit.
Oh yeah,
and spiritualism, and and it was a lot different when he wrote it. And then then they hired producers and directors and made it into a Hollywood show, which was really good. But I had no idea that Dan Aykroyd was all that into that stuff.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I mean, I love Dan Aykroyd. I mean, he's a great comedian, and the movies that he's been in and things like that. Yeah. But one of the things that perked me to him in my interests, even in my own family allegory, was just that. My family's had strange coincidences that have been happening our entire lives that stem back into the old country with my grandparents, which is probably like even like a whole other show.
Yes, but you should definitely come back. Yeah. My family had a mass sighting of something that they can't explain. That was
documented by a local airport, and it's part of family allegory. One of the main reasons I feel open to a lot of things, no different than I feel to my natural living experiences, as I mentioned, that have manifested, that I've been lucky enough, humbled enough to be able to be a part of. It has the same fulfillment of search, excitement, wonderment, and questioning.
Sure.
That keeps me, forward moving, forward thinking as a person. So yes, it could be a whole.
There's a whole another show. Yes, we could do a show together, and we'd never reach the bottom of the barrel of Jeff and Ed hanging
probably,
out.
Probably,
there should be
not.
beer, maybe maybe weed. I have to quit my federal job first. That would all be awesome.
Oh, Vegas, come on,
baby.
boy.
Yeah.
Come on,
I want to come to Canada.
Colorado,
I want to
Vegas,
eat some of your
right
veggies.
Yeah, man. I mean, I always say to some people, I said across the border, it's like, man, I wish I could send you something or whatever. But I'm always also trying to empower people with the idea that you can do it too. And like certain circumstances may not allow you to do it, but there's a lot of other ways that you can support, community gardening and other things like that, even when you're not tactically related to it. So I'm a big, huge proponent of talking about agriculture too. So anyway.
So Ed, this has been a blast. You're amazing.
You too,
but
you too,
we've been talking a while. We have to end the show now. I know. It's so sad. I agree. And he puts on his red nose. I wish I had video. Damn it. Ed put on a clown red nose, and he started crying. And it was awesome. Anyway, so you are at edroman.net, and you're amazing and never change and keep digressing all the time.
Thank you. You too.
I will.
That's what makes the show good.
I know.
That's what makes the show good.
Structure? What structure? It's Ed and Jeff. Forget it. Okay.
The subtitle of the show is "But I Digress."
Yet I digress. Thanks, Ed. All right. You have a good one.
You too.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Take care. Have a good one. Thanks, man.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for taking the time to ride along with us on another episode of Vroom Vroom Veer. For podcast info and show notes, be sure to head over to vvveer.com. That's VVER.com. Man, that's fun to say. And we'll catch up with you next time here on Vroom Vroom Veer.